Hi everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel. This week we are working on this gorgeous piece that's behind me. This one kind of makes me laugh because I started this one live with my audience at the beginning of the new calendar year, and I started off by saying, let's simplify things. I really want to simplify. And then I started making one of the most complex paint finishes I could have probably made. So this piece includes a ton of layers. It's got a lot of steps in it, but the end result is so incredibly detailed and it has so much depth and dimension that it was worth every single step along the way. So I'm thrilled with how this one came out. It's an absolutely gorgeous piece. We've got a little bit of texture on there. We've got a lot of layers in here, a lot of paint layers, and each one of them matters and peeks through underneath. You can see how much dimension this overall has. We're going to use some molds from Redesign with Prima. I don't know, this piece just has so much detail. There's so many steps I can't even begin to tell you, so you're going to have to stick around and see how we got to this beautiful look. Let's get started. Here's where I started on this furniture piece. It's got a lot of damage. It's seen some life. This top opens up and exposes a secretary desk, but the hinges are broken and the wood is chipped away. I'm actually going to be saving the inside of this secretary desk for a separate video because it needs so much work just on the inside itself. So let's jump in and get started on the body of this piece. I started off by removing all of the hardware and giving this a thorough cleaning using Greenie's furniture cleaner. I love this cleaner because it cuts through all the grease and dirt and oil that might be on furniture pieces. Once I've cleaned it with that Greenie's and wiped it down, I want to go ahead and come back with water and rinse away any cleaning residue. Cleaning residue can impede my paint from adhering to the furniture piece, so I want to make sure that's all removed as well. My next step is going to be to give this a scuff sand using my Surf Prep sander. The final step in my prep was to go ahead and coat this in YSL primer, and I chose the color white. In hindsight, I should have used a darker primer on this one, but it actually ended up working as a layer. I'm going to be doing a raised stencil technique on this piece, and I chose a stencil from Posh chalk, and I'm just applying it using a joint compound. This is one that doesn't crack or shrink. You want to make sure it has those features, and I'm just scraping it on over the stencil using a bowl scraper. Joint compound is a great texture medium, but I would say you want to use it when you're doing thinner textures. If you're doing something thicker, you'll want a texture medium that has a little bit more durability than just the joint compound. A few negatives about using joint compound as your medium: it does tend to reactivate when you expose it to moisture, so you need to be careful painting over the top of this. And also it produces a lot of sanding dust when you sand it, so be aware of those two things. Once I applied this stencil, I'm coming back with a trowel and I'm just creating kind of a broken look. I want this to look like a broken up plaster, an aged plaster look. And I'm just using a trowel to sort of apply a little bit of extra joint compound in some areas and then just mess up that stencil a little bit. I'm also going to apply some broken up patterns to the top of this piece, and I just place my stencil down and I'm going to fill it with the joint compound, but I'm not going to fill the entire stencil so it looks like it's been broken away. When I pull this stencil back, it's going to reveal my pattern underneath, and that's going to be what I cover in paint. This is going to be a layered paint finish, and so adding this texture as one of my layers ends up turning out to a beautiful result. Once I've got that joint compound all on, I want to go ahead and give it a light sanding, and you can see how much sanding dust falls away from this compound. This just knocks down any high nubs. And then I want to cover it in a coat of shellac. A spray primer would also work. Brushing over this, you need to be very careful because, like I said, that joint compound will reactivate when you expose it to moisture. With that shellac all dry, it is protecting my texture underneath, and I am ready to go ahead and add some paint over top. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my base coat of paint. I'm using Klingon brushes, and this is YSL paint in the color Carbon. And I'm going to brush this into that joint compound and cover all of that raised texture that I've got. This first step takes a little longer because I need to make sure that I get all of my paint into all those spaces where I've got raised areas. The next color that I'm using is called Foxtrot, and it's this army green. It's a beautiful color. And the important step in this is these are actually the colors that I don't want on my piece. When I'm doing a layered finish, I'm going to start off with colors that are much darker or much lighter than where I actually want to end. And that's because these are just going to be layers that peek through in my final product. So I'm just doing a lightly blended technique here. The last color that I use for this step is called Grecian clay, and it's just this beautiful khaki color. Now, this is a beautiful paint finish on its own, and I really love this color combination, but we have more steps to add. You can see I still have some areas where that white primer is showing through, but that's okay because this is a layered paint technique. My next color that I'm going to add is going to be Graphic Slate from YSL. I'm using a lot of water when I'm applying this coat, and that's because I want those colors from underneath to peek through. So I do that by using a lot of water, and then I'm going to use a rag to wipe away some of the excess paint. Each layer that I'm adding is not thoroughly brushed on, so I'm letting areas from underneath peek through, and then also using that water and the rag are other ways that I can let the colors from underneath peek through. There's going to be multiple colors and multiple layers in this paint finish, and so using each of these techniques are going to be ways that I let each of these colors have a presence. This soft beige is Restoration from Wiesel Paint, and this is going to be the next color in my finish, and I'm applying it the same way that I did the graphic slate, using a lot of water, not thoroughly brushing, and then I'm going to dab some of it off using that rag. I definitely pay attention when I'm doing layered paint techniques to contrast between my colors. So you'll notice that each color that I put on contrasts with what's underneath. And that's because if they're too close in tone, you're not going to really notice a difference between the two paint colors. So by contrasting them from a dark layer, light layer, dark layer, light layer, you're going to notice those colors even more. This was a lot of fun to just really play with these colors, and I'm using a lot of water, and I'm going to let it start running and dripping down all that texture, and that texture kind of guides the way the drips are going. And then I'm just going to use that rag to sort of dab it off so that I have a really uneven texture, and you can see here how all those colors are peeking through. The next color that I'm using is called River Rock, and I'm going to use this one just lightly, and I'm going to let this one drip quite a bit more than the others. You'll notice here once again that I have contrast. So this color definitely stands out from the ones that are underneath. And that's probably the most important tip that I can give in doing a layered technique is make sure your colors are not too close or you really won't notice all the layers. I'm applying the River Rock around the outside edges of my piece over where I've got that carbon and the graphic slate. These are three beautiful colors for a layer. Down the center, I'm going to add a little bit more of that Restoration, which is a soft beige, but I'm going to let this drip a little bit more. And I'm also going to add a little bit of Carbon, which is a nice off-white. I use my brush and I apply the paint in sort of an irregular pattern so that I've still got those areas peeking through. There's going to be areas where the paint is a little bit thicker and areas where it's thinner so that I get that really nice exposed finish. I don't want this piece to have overt drips. I don't want it to look drippy and messy. And so anywhere that I need to, I use my rag to control those drip marks. So I'll let them go as far as I want, and then I come back with the rag and I'll dry them up at the bottom. This is a really freeing paint finish. There really is no right or wrong way. The point of it is to just get a little bit messy. I tend to struggle with messier finishes. My mind just naturally tends towards organization. But every time I do these finishes, I always love them. They end up being some of my favorites. So don't be afraid to play around with some finishes that tend to scare you. Here's where I landed on this paint finish with all my drips and runs. This is a beautiful finish on its own, but of course I'm not done yet. So you can choose to leave this alone if you wanted to. This shot gets a little more up close on that paint finish and you can really see all those layers peeking through. So my final step on this is I'm going to dry brush a little of that cashmere paint over the top. And this is just going to catch the edges of that raised stencil detail, and it's also going to serve to mute and unify all those colors underneath. So if it was a little too bold in those photos I just showed you, this dry brushing technique is really going to tone it down and bring it together. To do this, I'm using a nice fluffy natural bristle brush and a little bit of Wiesel paint and cashmere. I'm dabbing my brush off either onto the floor, a piece of cardboard, or a rag, and then I'm just going to let the tips of those bristles hit the furniture piece. I'm doing this with very, very little paint on the brush. Here I'm going to do some dry brushing over the moldings, and this is going to bring out some of the details in those moldings. This is a really pretty furniture piece. It's not super old, but it does have great molded details, so I want to make sure that I bring those out. The dry brushing with all those layers underneath starts making the paint look like stone, so this is another way to get a great stone finish look. It just wouldn't be one of my furniture pieces if I didn't do a little bit of shading with black wax. It is absolutely one of my favorite things to do. I'm using Annie Sloan black wax and a small artist brush, and I'm going to ride it up along the edges of these moldings, and I'm going to put the black wax in the deep crevices. Then I'm going to use a slightly larger brush, and I'm going to smudge that black wax out so I get this sort of smoky effect around the edges of this detail. This is a fairly time-consuming step in the process, but I really enjoy doing it, so I don't mind at all. I do this on most every furniture piece, and it tends to make a huge difference. So a lot of times what you see in a blended finish from me is not just paint. It's usually paint layered with wax, sometimes glazes. It's that layering process that gives you the depth and dimension in the colors. I'm going to do this in all the lowest points along this piece. So I did it along all the moldings as well. And this just gives a little bit of shadowing. It makes those moldings pop even more to look like there's a shadow coming from behind it. So now we're just about wrapping up the finish on the body of this piece, but I haven't started on the top. So let's go take a look at the top of this. So I did that raised stencil detail, and I of course coated those in shellac as well, but now I need to add my drippy paint finish to the top of this, and I'm going to do that a little bit differently. I chose not to put the raised stencil over the entire top of this piece, and that's because it's going to be the most used portion of this. There are going to be things set on here. So I wanted to have some smooth surface area, but just a little bit of that raised detail to tie in with the body. So here I'm streaking in all of the same paint colors that I used on the body, and that is Wysal paint, and these colors are Grecian clay. I've got some cashmere, some river rock, some graphic slate. These are all the same colors I used on the body, and I'm randomly streaking them into the top, and then I'm going to use a ton of water, and I'm going to let these colors run together. And you can do that by lightly tipping your piece so it's off level, and that's going to cause the paint colors to run in a certain direction. I usually send them off the back of my piece so they don't drip down the front. Once I've layered all those colors and gotten the look that I want, I'm going to go ahead and do the same dry brushing over the top. Again, this just tones those colors down, sort of unifies them together. I'm using that natural bristle, dry, fluffy brush, very little paint on my brush, and I'm dry brushing a little bit of the cashmere over top. This is really going to pick up that raised stencil, and it's going to tone down those colors a little bit. But this is a layered technique, and I'm not done adding my layers yet. My next layer is going to be glaze. That's right, I'm going to use a glaze, and I'm going to use this over the entire piece. So I'm going to brush this on. This is Wysal glaze, and I'm brushing it on with one of my Klingon brushes. I'm going to brush it into all that detail. The reason I'm using the glaze is because I want it to sort of pick up all the detail in that raised stencil. I'm applying a pretty thin coat of the glaze so I can use a little bit of water to keep it running and moving while I work with it. I want to coat this entire side, and then once I've got a nice even thin coat on the entire side, I'm going to come back and wipe it away using a rag. This helps to just sort of dim those colors. It makes them look a little more aged, a little more dingy. It also adds another layer of color to that, and it's also going to pick up all the detail in that raised stenciling. You can see how it really exposes the breakaway detail that I did by messing my stencil up with that trowel. Once I got my glaze on, I felt like this was missing a little bit of color, and so I decided to add some little pops of red. This is actually a custom color mix that I made for another furniture piece, and I made this using Wysal paint in Republic Red, Mandarina, and Iron Oxide, and it was the perfect color to just brush on. So this is kind of fun. Anytime you make custom colors, you can mix up a little bit of extra, and then you've got that left over for future projects as well. In this case, this rusty red color was the perfect accent that I wanted for this piece. I just chose some spots to sort of dry brush a little bit using a cheap chip brush, and it's picking up a little bit of that texture. I made it look a little bit uneven and sort of smudged it in spots. I have some new releases to work with while I'm working on this project, and so I'm going to go ahead and add some of those to this, and that is some new molds from Redesign with Prima. I'm going to go ahead and cast these using amazing casting resin from Alumilite. I'm going to mix up equal parts of A and B and then slowly drizzle it into this mold. This mold is super detailed, so I want to make sure I get into all those nooks and crannies, and I drizzle it in slowly so that I don't overfill my mold. After about 10 minutes, I come back to my mold and that resin has fully cured. I can tell by the fact that it's turned white, and once it's fully white, I can flex that silicone mold and it will pop that resin out, and I've got an applique that's ready to apply to my furniture piece. I chose to go ahead and spray paint these using a bronze spray paint, and this is just going to cover up that white because I know I definitely don't want these to be white. The bronze is going to add that dark down in the details so that I won't need to glaze these later. Once that bronze paint is dried, I'm going to add a little bit of Wysal paint in graphic slate. I love this color, you guys. It's beautiful. It's a little bit of gray, but some blue undertones in it. This is one of the colors that I used on a base layer on my furniture piece. So when I apply these, it's going to match the colors that I've got in the finish. Next, I'm going to do some dry brushing over top. This is River Rock, and then I'm going to put a little bit of the cashmere over that. This layering effect, again, is going to make it match with the finish that I've got on this. Now, you'll notice I'm adding these appliques a little bit late in the process, and that's because I worked on this piece live on my page, and I wasn't able to show these molds until they were released to the public, so I had to keep them hidden, and I couldn't add them till the last step. So it is definitely an option to go ahead and put your molds on earlier in the process when you're still working on your paint finish, rather than trying to make them match later. Adding these molded appliques to the front really tied it in with some of the details that were already on there. They were really in keeping with the style of this piece. Here I am. My paint finish is just about done. This one is ready for some clear coat. I'm going to seal this up using Wiesel clear coat. This is their matte varnish. I love the low sheen. I obviously don't want to put a high sheen on this one because it's got a sort of a rustic look to it. Using my paint sprayer allows this clear coat to get into all the nooks and crannies of that raised detail, and it gives me the most professional look on my clear coats. Here's the finished piece. It is staging day. I staged this with some rustic wood items, a little bit of magnolias. What do you guys think? I put the original hardware back on after giving it a good cleaning. It's got the perfect bronze tone. I absolutely love how this one came out. I will be following up with a separate video for the inside of the secretary desk because that's a whole project in itself, but here is the completed piece. As always, you can find links for everything I use in the description for this post. You can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and on my website at brushbybrandy.com. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll click that subscribe button for weekly painting tutorials here at Brush by Brandy on YouTube.